And I guess there's a good time to say a warning here. There will be spoilers in this casual cast, so if you haven't seen the finale of the Gauntlet, do watch that first before coming here. Kyurakoto. I am the casual Kiwi, also known as Relinquished Soul, Seeker of the Strange in the world of Jewel Monsters.
Which you may have heard using this voice in the past.
In any case, this is an out of character, non-canon, I suppose you could call it, casual cast, where I'll be talking through some of the behind the scenes of the making of the Gauntlet, and my thoughts on how it was as an experiment in the Yugi tubing ARG space. Because I think there's a lot of interesting takeaways, especially for anyone coming in and wanting to try something similar. Because a lot of stuff I learned along the way as I was doing it. And I think if I could go back, there's definitely things I would have done differently. And I think it was coming quite close to being something very, very special, but certain elements held it back. So, yes, that's primarily what this relatively informal casual cast is going to be about. And apologies if my speech is a little bit off at points. I'm using a very sort of makeshift setup with my laptop here where I'm hearing myself as I speak, but that shouldn't show up on the cast. But it might mean sometimes that I speak a little slower or skip over a few things just because of the feedback I'm getting. Hopefully it sounds much better on your end. But yes, so with these casual casts, we've done a couple in the past. Essentially, it's an open invite to everyone in Team Casual who wants to jump on and be involved. And in order for this to work, it's basically quite a back and forth. So I can ramble for a little bit, but hopefully we'll get some people jumping in. And so I'll just make sure another message is sent out on the Discord that we are live. Hopefully we'll be able to get the full thing on recording. My apologies if it ends sooner. Again, it's very much a makeshift setup on my laptop. I don't often do the casual cast. We save it for special occasions. In this case, the conclusion of the Gauntlet. It's all in its parts, completely uploaded now on YouTube. And there is a supercut, which I'm very excited to release right after we finish recording here. So that is going to put everything together of the Gauntlet into one full video, which comes to just under 9 hours, which, considering how long it took to make, I know Silent was like, wow, I thought we would have had a lot more footage. But at the same time, that's a lot to digest. We've kind of joked that the Gauntlets could make like a falling asleep kind of content. You kind of get your perfect 8 hours with a little bit extra. So, that could be a fun way to digest it. I'm not sure what your dreams would be like. I wouldn't call it soothing exactly, but it does have a certain melody to it. So, hopefully you enjoy. I think that will definitely be one of the things that was more controversial around the Gauntlet was the music choices. Again, it all had to be no copyright, and I must admit, I did want to capture a little bit of that sort of pulse pounding Yu-Gi-Oh energy, where you have a kind of more energetic soundtrack that goes with the dueling. So it's a bit unconventional. But hopefully people will have enjoyed having that kind of upbeat element to the duels where it has quite this somber story underneath. Again, a lot of what is happening is subtext. So there is a deliberate sort of incongruity between the absurdism of this kind of slightly campy sort of Yu-Gi-Oh! Shadow game scenario with this quite intense personal drama that hopefully really anchored it. But I'm perhaps getting a little bit ahead of myself. I think just while we're waiting to see if anyone does jump onto the casual cast, um, probably I can give a bit of background on what led to Team Casual, Casual Kiwi YGO, and the overall ARG. Because the thing to remember is that this was always the end goal. The channel was created, Casual Kiwi YGO, with the idea that there was this alternate reality game, this ARG, which was playing in the background. And eventually, the two main characters in that, Casual Kiwi and Silent, or Silent M, were going to duel. And that shadow game, that final shadow duel, was going to wrap up the channel and provide a conclusion on what was started all those years ago. Of course, how long it would take, I greatly underestimated how long I would need to put everything together. When I was starting out, it seemed relatively straightforward. All I had to do was make 10 deck profiles and then 9 jewels, and then it would be done. Sounds simple enough. But when you factor in trying to acquire all the necessary cards, keeping up with any changes in the Yu-Gi-Oh game so that it's relevant to the larger player base, and then actually finding the time to film and put it all together, edit it all together, takes a lot of time. And something I'd definitely say to any new people who are thinking about trying some sort of interactive mystery plot, whether it's Yu-Gi-Oh or not. If you're just doing anything where you're looking to have some sort of audience engagement with your content and you're wanting to have a storyline that runs through it, I think, especially when you're starting out and you're not sure of your skills, it's very good to record a lot in advance. Before you announce anything, before you upload anything, have a whole bunch of content backed up. And then rather than uploading sporadically over a couple of months or a couple of years, you can have it like every fortnight or every week there's a new video and everything's already pre-planned, and that keeps the momentum going. I think one of the toughest things with and I'll just, I think, refer to this ARG as the Gauntlet, because the Gauntlet really encompasses both where the series is strongest and where it was all building to. The Gauntlet Shadow game is the nexus point of everything that was being done. And so when I talk about the Gauntlet, that is the project as the whole. At least generally. So when it came to the Gauntlet, a lot of momentum was lost because, well, I wanted it to have stakes. And if this Gauntlet was meant to be in the canon of the series, it was meant to take place over a single night. A single night of Shadow Games was the length of the Gauntlet in universe. And so the outcome happened at the very end of 2020. So if it was meant to decide the fate of Silent and Kiwi, if Kiwi was just posting in the Discord after that point, like nothing was wrong, then there would be no suspense because everyone would know things work out one way or the other. So I had to go on hiatus while that was happening. And yes, it's true, Relinquished Soul was kind of my secret identity, and it meant that I was able to, kind of still guide things and try and keep the engagement alive. But it's not the same when you've built up a relationship with a creator and then that creator's gone and expecting engagement to still happen. So I noticed fairly quickly that once I started working on the main Gauntlet and I had to go on social media hiatus, more and more people were falling off. And I think the momentum just wasn't there. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the Gauntlet is viewed in the future, because I do believe at some point there will be a successful Yu-Gi-Oh! Alternate reality game. And you can see lots of explanations of what an alternate reality game is from other channels. Nightmind has a great one, and he also refers to it as unfiction. But this idea of interactive content that kind of role plays as being in the same universe as the audience, which I think really sets it aside from things like live action Yu-Gi-Oh series, which can be awesome in their own right, but it's very clear that for the majority of those series, they are meant to be taking place in some other world to our own, usually in the world of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime or the manga, and the characters always act as if they are in like the TV show. Whereas my series, I wanted to ground it in our reality as much as I possibly could, which was why I use play mats instead of dual discs, why I try to keep it as close to the real life game as I possibly can, and try and realistically portray the what a shadow game would actually look like if it was to happen in the real world. Again, whether I was successful is another story, but that idea of when you're watching the Gauntlet, you feel like this is happening in your reality and you have some bearing on what's happening, whether it's by participating in the Discord, looking into any of the hidden codes, looking into the theories behind why Kiwi and Silent are doing what they're doing to try and puzzle out those parts of the stories. Audience participation, it needs to feel real, it needs to feel grounded. And I feel like other series have managed to achieve this, kind of other nostalgic properties, or a lot of alternate reality games rely on the discovery of vintage materials, on nostalgia, to kind of anchor their stories and immediately build a connection with the audience. They want to see something that they kind of remember or half remember, twisted and refreshed in a new, exciting way with all these mysteries to uncover. And that's the essence of a lot of ARG content. the difference between ARG and unfiction can be a bit blurry, but the way I see with unfiction is that the interactive element isn't quite as important. It's more about grounding it in our reality, regardless of interaction. So I guess it's a continuum between really full-fledged ARGs and more unfiction projects. Really, the Gauntlet leans more towards the unfiction side, but there are codes and stuff set up right from the beginning that you can explore and look into. And while some of those codes, like the dice code, were cracked, other codes, like the blue sleeve code, primarily, if I'm honest, the blue sleeve code, were not completely cracked by the end of the Gauntlet. And there's now stuff in the theory section for anyone who wants to follow that rabbit hole. There's a lot of content there yet to be unexplored, which I think casts the third party, aka Relinquished Soul, in a very different light. And it's well worth exploring that content. I don't want to spoil it because I think it's great if this series is ever rediscovered that there is still more to uncover about it and it hasn't all been wrapped up in a neat bow. That's the thing about the finale, is that I feel like while it concludes the Gauntlet, it doesn't wrap up all loose ends. There's still an iceberg, and the visual content that you see on the Casual Kiwi channel is just the tip of the much larger story which is happening under the surface. I think where it's good is that it wraps up the human story, but if you're more into the technical details, like how are there multiple Kiwis, why is Silent M the way that she is, then there's a lot more that you can explore in kind of additional content that's a bit more hidden. So hopefully that will be covered in the future. Again, as to the successfulness of the Gauntlet, it's a hard thing to always measure. I think it's easy to get disparities when you see, massive projects take off. I mean, it's silly to say, but I would say the closest thing to the Gauntlet, which has been successful, quotation marks, is Inscription, which is not a Yu-Gi-Oh property, but I think it captures the essence of what a Yu-Gi-Oh ARG would be like. It's got essentially a shadowy game going on, and then you've got layers upon layers of conspiracy and intrigue under the surface of what seems like a comparatively simple supernatural story, and just the more you dig into it, the more there is under the surface. But to this day, it's really funny. I bought Inscription and I started playing it, but I just can't complete it because every time I boot up Inscription and I look at that property, I always think, this is what I'd hoped for the Gauntlet. But obviously this is a much more polished project, a much more interactive project. Kudos to everyone who's worked on Inscription. And it reminds me, unfortunately, of the shortcomings of the Gauntlet. And so I find it very hard to engage with. It's kind of like when you read a book, and I don't know if anyone else experiences this, but you think, wow, this book is so good, I wish I had thought of it. I wish I'd come up with these ideas, because they've just so perfectly captured it. And so, yeah, Inscription came out after I started working on the Gauntlets. In fact, I even saw teasers for it, and had it wishlisted. But I didn't realize quite how big a project it would be and how much it would reach. I think I would have engaged with it a lot more in those early days. because yeah, it's still my hope that someone in the Yu-Gi-Oh field will take what's been done in the Gauntlet, what's been done in Inscription, and make something Yu-Gi-Oh based which captures that same idea, because I think it would be massively successful. I think all the big Yu-Gi tubers would want to cover it, and then all the big ARG unfiction channels would want to cover it, and it would do gangbusters. But you need to match up both the great idea of Yu-Gi-Oh! Shadow Game real life with perfect or really strong execution. And my execution with the Gauntlet, while I think story-wise it captured a lot of good points, the execution needed to be strong if it was to reach a large audience. So for me, that's where things could have gone better, and I can't say the Gauntlet was a complete success. Where I am happy is with the concept. I think that the endorsement that I got from Nick Nocturne or Nightmind when I submitted to his Nightmind Index, the synopsis of what the Gauntlet was, showed that there was a real interest in the idea, and that was probably the biggest boost I got from any creator once I started the Gauntlet and went on hiatus was, Nick Nocturne, who's probably the closest thing to a patron that I've had with my series. And, even though he hasn't covered the series in depth, he's lent his voice to one of the matches. He plugged the idea on Twitter. He's been happy to have some of my notes on the creation of the Gauntlet on the Nightmind research section of the index, as well as, of course, the entrance on the index. And he included one of my short videos, Greed, which really showed, this idea of like a Yu-Gi-Oh! ARG and really strong definition as part of his Candy Bowl series. So, like, massive props to Nick Nocturne. Like, his love for small creators in the AGRG and the ARG space so often shines through. And I think one day when, whether it's by me or someone else, you get that perfect execution matched with, a perfect concept that hooks people in. And perfect's the wrong word, but you understand what I mean, just really well executed, then I'm sure Nick Nocturne will be there to make sure it reaches a real audience, because he loves these kind of small, niche projects that are really trying to do something interesting and break mold. So, I have hope for the future. I mean, something I want to touch on now is, I guess, where did the idea for all this come from? Why did I think Yu-Gi-Oh! And, like, spooky, scary ARGs? Well, obviously, I feel there's a natural connection because everyone knows original Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially the 4Kids dub with the shadow games, with this kind of slight horror under vibe that runs through all of it, even though it's like meant to be all about a children's card game. You have this really untapped potential to just grow that, go the way that the original manga did with Suzuki Takahashi, where you had this almost like a horror manga that just happened to have card games. It was really psychological. A lot of characters were left like mentally broken by the end of their duels with, Yami Yugi the Pharaoh. It was a much more brutal kind of setup, a dangerous setup than what, we would see normally from Yu-Gi-Oh! Media today. So, massive just, baseline potential. But then you gotta remember, I was looking at starting this series around 2017, into 2018. I think the channel started like right at the end of September 2018, and there was a bit of a lead up to that, getting all the equipment and so forth. I know that at least July of 2018, I was getting like the GoPro, that would be the staple filming equipment for the series. But, a big thing was Rank 10 YGO with Ojama Lime talking about dark Yugi tubing. Because that was the first instance, even as a joke, it was, clearly a bit. But it was such a good bit. Ojama Line talking about being sentenced to farm sand for doing dark Yugi tubing. You had the, like, glitchy, you know, like hidden elements, and the sense that like dark Yugi tubing was a thing that always existed, but was like super underground and edgy. Um, and it was just ripe for something to be explored. And obviously, I don't think Rank 10 super wanted to lean into that, like in any serious way. He was very happy to leave it as like an open mystery, which I think is perfectly fine. I think it works well in that, it keeps it funny by having it be so, like, memeable. So, that's cool. But at the same time, I was like, well, what if it was real? What if we did have content like that? And there is some very strange Yu-Gi-Oh content out there. I trust me, I have trawled the absolute, darkest depths of YouTube looking for the strangest Yu-Gi-Oh content out there. But I think nothing that I have seen has fully captured what I'm looking for with Dark Yu-Gi tubing, which is, a series which presents itself as in our universe, happening in our world, but also has this Yu-Gi-Oh magic creeping in, and that treats itself seriously. I've seen a lot of edgy content, but usually it's so hammy you can't take it seriously. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I find it takes you out. Um, and I always try to have it so that, as absurd as things would get, Kiwi and Silent were always treating things seriously. And so when the characters are taking it seriously, you feel like you should take it seriously too. And so that's how you kind of keep things feeling gritty and high stakes. Because you feel like if this goes wrong for Kiwi, which ultimately it does spiral out, that there is a real consequence there. And, you're hoping that it doesn't go there, but, inevitably it's getting closer and closer. I suppose that was another big thing that influenced it, was this idea of time and inevitability. Originally, I was thinking once the Gauntlet wrapped up, I should delete all the videos. I was thinking of doing it like Unis Arnis style. I saw all that happening, so it would be like a myth. But seeing how few people were yet to engage with the series, I felt it would do a disservice to delete the history if people hadn't saved things and there was no record. I do definitely want to thank Desperate Oak and Jackalope while I'm here, who streamed episodes of the Gauntlet. Because, that adds to that canon. We've got, like, reactions of people live seeing these things for the first time. And if anything does happen to my channel, then those records are preserved for the most part. And the other, yeah, the other interesting thing, of course, is that certainly I feel like with the Gauntlet, with how I presented it or set it up or how it went, I do think something happened with YouTube. I think the algorithm didn't like it very much. And it's odd because, again, you see a lot of unfiction projects which I think are much more graphic and grim and, overt in their themes really just take off. But, like, trying to search up, like, the Gauntlet series is difficult. Even if you put in the full channel name, you usually get the channel at the top, and then you get other creators' results immediately after it. I think it's been improved slightly now, where you get some of the recommendations, but the Gauntlet matches in particular are very hard to search, and it's very telling that whenever I upload them, you're looking at, if you're lucky, 100 views. Where if I do a deck profile, I might get up to like 1,000. Um, so there's a searchability issue, which, again, if you're thinking of doing something like this, you might need to address, or at least make sure that your channel presents it in such a way that YouTube doesn't get angry at you with how your content is presented. I can only give you so much advice on that because I think I've fell into that trap. That's why going forwards, with any future projects, I will be switching to a different YouTube channel. Right now, that will be the Relinquished Soul YouTube channel.
Which up till now has used this voice.
But now that I am unmasked as Relinquished Soul, Seeker of the Strange in the world of dark Yugi tubing, we can go ahead on that channel, and I found that for the most part, it seems that YouTube has no problems with it. It's put ads on some of the contents. I can have some more lighthearted stuff, build up an audience, and then we can look at, do we want to use that channel for more dark YouTubing, or do we want to start a whole fresh channel and do something? If we want to continue doing this stuff, I mean, again, my life has gotten a lot more busy, and I guess is something that should be noted is between the final filming of the Gauntlet finale and actually editing it all together, there were two pretty big life events, which was, I got a legal job. I am now a lawyer, and that takes up a lot of my time. And the other thing is that Silent and I, while we're still friends and we parted amicably, we have broken up since the final filming of the Gauntlet. And so I think, Silent in particular is not super keen on a Gauntlet 2 in the same style. So I think if there was to be a Gauntlet 2 or a similar project, it would need to be very different. But I think we both like how Silent's story ended. Again, spoilers, just the idea of her choosing to live on. And again, there's lots of different interpretations of the ending. I don't want to lock anything in, but at least for how I see it, is that Silent has been freed from her reliance on Kiwi and is able to be a free agent in the world and is out there doing whatever Silent wants to do. That might be, taking people on shadow games, or maybe she's put down her cards. But I think leaving it there with, just the endless possibility of that, I think is nice. I think roping Silent back in for like a Gauntlet 2, at least where I'm sitting right now, would not be the best way to do a Gauntlet 2. I think it would be better to focus more on Kiwi and the Kiwis, I guess, and where they go from now. Because while Kiwi by the end was able to let go, the relinquished soul Kiwi was incapable of doing that really in his timeline. So where does he go from now? What's the next step from here? He seems to be interfering a lot with the flow of time, and it's unlikely that he's going to stop now that this gauntlet has ended. So yeah, there's a lot to decide there. The other thing as well is what happens with Team Casual. And my hope today was to get some input on the best way to handle it. Because the idea was if Kiwi lost the gauntlets, then the implication was that the Discord would be destroyed in some way, or buried. You could argue that through the gauntlet taking so long to come out, it's by proxy destroyed the Discord. As I say, Gauntlet views were always garbage. And thank you to those who have watched the Gauntlet. But I think in many ways it did kill the momentum of the channel and the Discord. Hence why it's kind of difficult to set up a casual cast at this point, even with the finale having happened just a week ago. So what is to happen there? My thinking right now is that there should be a freeze on the vast majority of the channels. Maybe just leaving general open, so we can see where the theories got up to. In the time that Team Casual had to solve the Gauntlet HRG, how far did they get? And so in that way, there'll be a preserved record if the series is ever rediscovered in the future, if people take up interest. They can see where the original contributors got to, but still have at least one channel open where they could go beyond that and explore more. I also hate the idea of completely destroying the Discord, because I know this is a place where, you know, the most loyal, supportive members of Team Casual have gathered, and I think taking away those connections would be wrong. So I'm thinking leaving maybe general open, and closing down everything else is my thinking. I'm still unsure if I want to do more. The Kagari bot is in place because it has a Thanos snap option. So I can cut the numbers of people in this Discord in half at any stage. And, you know, should I do a purge in line with, you know, Relinquished Soul bringing
destruction and fire raining down,
or not? Again, my instinct is it goes against the idea of keeping the connections here alive. We'll see how things go, I think, with the freeze, and then if it seems like more is needed to really hammer the point home that this is a reckoning, we can look at going a bit more intense. My laptop is pretty bad these days. One idea I did have was allowing people to duel to stay in the Discord, but I'm not sure if I can install Master Duel or even YGO Pro at this stage with the memory I have left. It's very hard to figure out what's clogging up all the memory. It's just a very old laptop. My ability to duel is somewhat limited until I can upgrade my equipment. So yeah, that's going to be not how we do things, at least for now. But yeah, those are my initial thoughts. I know some people like Avra are keen for me to do like a casual Kiwi attorney at law. That could be a really fun idea, looking at rulings and stuff. I get relinquished soul content. I plan to have a bit more chill. I'm not keen to immediately jump into doing another big ARG. I want to recoup a little bit, build up some momentum, and then look at doing another project in the future. So it might be fun to test out a few different formats and see what people respond to. But I think I will be transitioning from being known as the casual Kiwi to being known more as
Relinquish soul.
without the voice changer. But yeah, Kiwi belongs to the Gauntlet. Relinquished soul is what remains. So I want to go forward with Relinquished Soul and see what new can be generated under that banner. And it's possible that Relinquished Soul could inspire people to try out some more dark Yugi tubing style content. Something I've considered doing is maybe in the future I could do some reaction content in the live action Yu-Gi-Oh space. Reaction content is actually super popular. A lot of people react to the big series and even the small series. So perhaps I should react to some live action Yu-Gi-Oh and give my perspective, because I have tried to engage with the live action Yu-Gi-Oh community. I feel like there is a lot of overlap between what I've been doing and what they've been doing. For whatever reason, it seems like my engagement so far has been a little lukewarm. I have had some good interactions with live action Yu-Gi tubers, but it always seems like whenever there's a discussion over what is happening with live action Yu-Gi-Oh, the Gauntlet is never in the conversation. So, I mean, there is a distinction I feel between my style of content and what a lot of live action Yu-Gi-Oh is, but I think the spirit of it is very similar. And it would be nice to see some more engagements between what I would call, the dark Yugi tubing community, the stuff around the Gauntlet, and the live action Yu Gi Oh community. To kind of bring those two sides together, find some blend. I certainly don't think dual discs could not work in dark Yugi tubing. Personally, I think if you are gonna do dual discs, you should try and make them as realistic as possible. It's worth spending a little bit of money to get a proper dual disc, or um, if you have the skills, create a dual disc that's like metal in some way. I'm thinking what would be awesome would be like steampunk kind of dual discs where it's like all twisted wires and things. It kind of looks like dual disc that's very bare bones, like an ancient gears kind of dual disc. I think that would look so cool. But I think if you're trying to go for dark Yugi tubing, you're trying to have that realism. You don't want to have people dueling with just cardboard on their arms unless that's meant to be like a joke, and then you have the real danger come in and like break up the party. Because people aren't going to take it too seriously if you're trying to depict it as super serious, and then everyone's using just the barest of bare bones stuff, and um you know it's relatively slapped together. And that's not to put down, because I know there are some live action Yu-Gi-Oh channels that do use just very basic like cardboard dual discs. You guys doing your own thing, you're having fun with it, that's awesome. But your style is more campy, more upbeat, more TV show, anime adjacent. So you can kind of believe that in this alternative universe, like, you can use your imagination. It's like theater. So I think that can work well. But yes, if you're trying to do something like dark Yugi tubing and you want to make it gritty and tense, you need to be willing to invest a little bit of additional time and effort to make it feel plausible, to make that jump to shadow games in real life as easy as possible. This might be a good time actually to jump back a little bit, talking about advice for anyone who's looking to create their own dark Yugi tubing series. Think about entry points, because this is something I came up against a couple of times, and I still don't think I've fully solved the problem. But essentially, if you want to start engaging with the Gauntlet, where do you begin? Because the start of the series is a very slow burn. It starts off with me mostly doing very normal deck profiles with one or two little hints that something's going on in the background. I mean, the very first episode basically just has the dice code and the blue sleeve code. I don't think silent appears. You don't have any hidden subtitle text. It's super straightforward. And the idea, of course, that it would be like the boiling the frog analogy, where you're gradually ramping it up. But when you go back and you just want to get to the meat of the matter, you're like, well, why would I watch like 2 to 3 hours of mostly standard deck profiles before I get into the real meat of the matter? But if you jump right to the start of the Gauntlet, there's all this context that you're missing out that kind of came before, that built up in that. So it's very hard for a new person to perfectly jump in. You could jump in the Gauntlet Prelude, which was essentially my test of the Gauntlet format. Like, what would it look like? How would the setup be? But I think out of all the content, because it was kind of an experiment, just setting the stage, it's much weaker than the main Gauntlet. So you could watch the Gauntlet Prelude and be like, oh, this doesn't seem all that great. It's a bit sloppy. I'm not sure if I want to watch another 9 hours of this. So that doesn't seem like a good jumping in point either. There's a bunch of ways you can tackle this. You could have an in-universe or out-of-universe trailer, which kind of kicks things off and sets expectations. Or you can have a more explosive kind of opening, which is in-universe, that kind of sets up the dangers, where everything is going right from the get-go. And there's another great thing with filming everything in advance. If you have content right from the end of the series, right at the beginning, and you can use that to inform that first video and be really, really, like, on the money. I mean, there's a lot of Gauntlet content which was made with the anticipation of more details being added later, but it was a continual process of working out details and then building on it as you went. And so consequently, there was elements to it that I think, could have been more fleshed out in an earlier stage to really keep people hooked. And you can just imagine if it was really tight in the beginning, and then we jump right into the Gauntlet, and that was coming out regularly. It was something you could look forward to every week or every fortnight. I think it could have been a really big success. So yeah, that's a big thing, is think about if someone's jumping into this series, where do they jump in? It doesn't have to be the very first video, it can be somewhere else. But if it is somewhere else, have a very clear idea of where that will be. Because otherwise, it can be quite tough. I mean, a good example of this might be Alex Kister with the Monument Mythos. I know there's a whole bunch of drama going on with him personally at the moment. I'm not going to get into that. But with his series, the very... Wait, not the Monument Mythos. The Mandela Catalog, sorry. With the Mandela Catalog, the very first video sets the tone, but story-wise, starting later is what's recommended. And, that works because there aren't a lot of videos and it's pretty easy to, work through and rearrange and figure out where you are. But once you have a big catalog over years, that becomes a lot harder to find that start point. So think about that early on. Now, other things to talk about. Because again, this might be the last major casual cast we do, even if it's rather quiet today, people in the future may want to know certain things. Or perhaps how they should look at the Gauntlet. I mean, I do think the main show is what is in that, almost 9 hours of dueling. If you want to jump in now, the two best places to start, in my view, is either the supercut that I am releasing shortly, which has everything together. You can see timestamps, you can see it all laid out. Or go through to the individual episodes, because the cool thing with the individual episodes and then the playlist is you have the last time on Yu-Gi-Oh's, which are cut out in the supercut, and the last time on Yu-Gi-Oh's really make sure that you can watch a little bit, you can go away and you come back and you get a refresher on where you're up to. And it also, you have the guest cameos, which is always fun. Thank you to everyone who provided those. I was really amazed how receptive a lot of YouTubers were to be involved. I think it certainly helped that and perhaps a strategy is unfair, but my logic was, some of these creators are very hardworking. They've got a lot on, and they've got to be selective in how they spend their time. And so intros and outros were something that could be recorded very quickly, maybe take a minute of time to do, and then could be reused over several different rounds and easily implemented without any difficulties or re-recordings. So the idea was put forward the pitch, link them if they want to see what it is, and then be like, I only need a moment of your time. Because I've seen other creators go and say to I'm talking small Yu-Gi tubers mostly, go to large creators and say, hey, I want to do this series with you, and we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and it's going to be really cool. Please help. And then they never get a response, because what they're asking is massively time consuming, and the output of what the large creator gets from being involved in that is minuscule compared to what the small creator gets out of that. So it's very unbalanced. Whereas if you're asking for something very simple, that doesn't take a lot of their time, then that's a great way to, make those connections, because a lot of big YouTubers do want to make connections. They want to help out smaller creators, but they don't always have the time to help everyone, or convert a lot of time into helping one specific person. So that's something to think about if you want to get larger creators involved in your series, or build up interest that way, or involve the wider community through those sorts of ways. Um, I guess another thing to talk about is perhaps timing of these things. Depending on the level of skill of the participants, if you're doing like a dual series like the Gauntlet was, editing might be relatively small or it might be quite time consuming. Um, I'm quite a rogue player. I've done some tournaments in person. I think I even did all right in one regional with the Amorphages. Uh, but, my tournament record is not amazing. I'm pretty rogue in my approach. And with Silent, she had a lot of experience on Master Duel, but hadn't been to any sort of locals or in-person tournaments. And for her with her gloves, it was quite finicky to hold the cards a lot of the time. So our skill levels were relatively low. And we were filming in quite a hot bathroom the majority of the time. So there was a lot of editing that had to be done to make sure that things kind of felt natural and keep the momentum of games going. You might not have to do that if you're doing a duel with someone where both of you are quite experienced Yu-Gi-Oh players, but we had to do a bit of that. And the other thing to note with the editing was you'll have noticed I'm quite into magic on the channel. And that was one of the keys to the blue sleeve code was magic. That, as you went through and you were trying to find out what could be this key word, one of the things that made the casual Kiwi unique was this interest in magic and illusion. And the hope was that people would pick up on that and they would try that as one of the code words and they'd crack it. And there were some clues that you could find, but they were buried a bit deep because I didn't want it to be too easy to figure out that key word. Anyway, magic was a big part of the channel, and I was quite interested in how that could be used in dueling. Now, obviously, when it comes to sleight of hand stuff and false cuts and everything, you don't want to be doing this in tournament plays. I would never endorse that. A lot of the things that we did in the Gauntlet to make sure that the story and the gameplay matched. And so a big thing was making sure that we had ways of making some of the games more interesting that way. Kind of like WWE wrestling, it's a kayfabe situation where, to an extent, like, it has to have this fictional element of it to keep it interesting, but you're blending it with enough reality that it's still engaging and fun. And something to note with a lot of these tricks that we were doing is that they wouldn't work in tournament play because it relied on both me and Silent working together as a team to make them happen. Essentially, among various different techniques, we were making sure that each other's decks were stacked in some of the games. I won't say all of the games. And something I would absolutely love for someone to do, please do this, is go through the Gauntlet and look for any, I guess you'd call them cheats, like, sleight of hand stuff. Because I edited the majority of the Gauntlet so that when we were doing sleight of hand stuff, it wasn't just cut out. It was included in the edit. If you look for it, you can find numerous examples of where we are doing a little bit of funny business. And I would love to see someone go through and dissect that. Because honestly, once you see some of the techniques, you can't unsee it. And I think it'd be hilarious to see how moments kind of change once you notice the sleight of hand. But again, it wouldn't work in tournaments because both players were in knowledge of what was happening. And the only thing is the passive observer on the video call might not be able to pick it up. But personally, again, in a situation where there was like thousands of eyeballs, I think it would get picked up. I never saw it get called out during the actual run of the Gauntlet, any of those things. But now that the series is finished, well, this is your chance to go through and see what happens. Some of them I think are more subtle than others. And I think if you're ever wondering, like, oh, Kiwi, why not just let it play out? I mean, these are all rogue decks, just see what happens. The game with the least sort of shenanigans was match 3. And match 3 is absurd in its length. Like, every other Gauntlet match is around 40 minutes total, but match 3 is like each round is 40 minutes. And that's because the majority of it is just, luck of the draw, and two very stally decks up against each other. And I think for anyone watching the Gauntlet, match 3 is the real test if you're gonna make it through or make it far, because match 3 is a slog. It is the weakest in my opinion. Good luck to anyone in the future watching the Gauntlet. If you can make it through match 3, don't worry, it gets easier. I suppose the other big stopping point is match 7, I believe, with the tooth extraction, which is as gory as the Gauntlet gets. I know poor Jackalow had to skip it because it was too much for him. But, again, there's no actual blood or stuff going on. It's all fictional. It's all a lot of brown goo. And again, that was kind of how do we get that realistic element without making it too gory and YouTube, getting upset. We used a lot of soy sauce to make our blood effects, which I think worked well because the idea was, it was like cards bleeding. And of course, cards wouldn't bleed red, they would bleed brown or something similar. So, that was to kind of show that supernatural evidence. And I won't give away too much how we did it with making cards bleed. I think, again, if you go through, there's probably some frames where you can figure out how we did it. But in the moment, I think for the most part, it's quite convincing. But yeah, it's funny with that. The few and very few complaints that we had was people freaking out over some of the knife stuff. But I think you have to have that level of intensity to it as long as you're always being safe. I think Penn and Teller put it quite well when they're talking about magic tricks and how, anyone can, go and like stab themselves with a knife and, get a rise out of people. But magic is about more than that. It's the great thing about magic is this idea of making the unreal real. But in order to do that, it can't be real magic. It can't be real. So you've got to pull off an illusion. You've got to pull off a trick. And so if you're ever putting yourself in real danger with what you're doing, that's not true magic. It should always be completely safe, no matter how dangerous it may look, because what you don't want to do is have your audience feel awful for participating and engaging with it, and I hope that I struck the right balance with that. That again, safety was always first and foremost. The great irony is that I think the only um, major injury with the Gauntlet, if you'd even call it a major injury, it was just a bit of a sort of uh-oh moment, was actually before the filming of the very first episode, because there is an opening bit where Silent steps on Kiwi's phone, and there's a sound effect of like the glass cracking under her boot. Oh my. Anyway, uh, there's a sound effect, and I was like, how do we get that? And so my instance was, well, I'd need to break a glass by stepping on it and then record that sound. So I got this glass, and it must have been quite a thick glass, thicker than I realized. I put it in a sock so that it would be covered up and protected, and then I tried to step on it with my boot, but it wasn't breaking, it was secure. So I was like, okay, I need something really heavy that I can like hit it with. So I look around the bathroom for something to hit it with, and there's this big soap dispenser. And I'm like, okay, this feels really heavy. Like, I'll hit the glass with this. And so I bring the soap dispenser down on the glass, which is covered with the sock. And, like, as soon as I do, it's like I realize, oh, the soap dispenser is so heavy because it's made out of ceramic, and ceramic is fragile and it breaks. So anyway, the sound that you hear at the very beginning of the Gauntlet is glass and ceramic breaking together, because I bring the soap dispenser down and it shatters in my hand. And it cuts like the fatty part of my hand under my thumb, and I just start bleeding everywhere. It's a really great sound effect, but yeah, it was a bit of a moment. And thankfully, Silent was close by, and we had a medic kit, and we were able to tend to it. Before that, while that was getting wrapped up, though, the Gauntlet table was nearby, and just on instinct, I slap my hand against the table and like smear over it. And so when you watch the Gauntlet and you see that like blood stain in the center of the table that gets less and less as it goes on, that is actual real blood. That's my real blood from this accident that happened right at the very beginning. And again, I wouldn't recommend doing any of this on purpose. I think there's loads of fake bloods out there which would get you the exact same effect. It's totally not worth it. But yeah, the one real thing in the Gauntlet is that sound effect and that blood stain on the table. And it really is just naturally reducing over time because of just how long it took us to actually film it. And of course, we were spilling soy sauce on it like every other time we filmed. So, but I quite like that it reduces over time. It feels like as Silent and Kiwi are dueling, the reduction of the blood smear is like them resolving their issues. And I think Kazuki Takahashi put it well when he talked about a duel being a conversation. And that was really how I wanted this to be as well. Like, yes, it's a battle, and it has a lot of the beats of like a shonen battle. But like any good shonen battle, it's also a conversation between the opponents. And that's how I want to do it. And why there need to be showmanship and why there need to be illusion, because we wanted to capture not just a raw, pure skill contest, but a story. And I think anyone thinking about doing something like this needs to first think about safety and then secondly think about story, because you want your action to tell the story, especially when you have one character that doesn't speak and you have another character who's gradually losing it and trying to focus on playing cards and pouring with sweat. You know, you need the action to speak for itself. So that's a really big thing, because it shouldn't be a case of where you can skip the duel and just get the content before and after. It should all matter. And hopefully be concise enough that they don't get bored consuming all of that. Again, did the Gauntlet achieve that? Hard to say. Again, when we had streaming of it, people did get quite far, and it was only once they ran out of fresh episodes to look at that things trailed off. So uploading was, I think, the problem there. But I think as Jackalo put it was like a car crash where you couldn't look away. And every duel has its own gimmick and thing going on. I mean, even if match three's gimmick is just that it's horrifically long and looping repeatedly, like it's still something that sets it apart. And all of the duels have something like that that sets them apart. Um, yeah, even duels like, you know, match one, match two, match four, even though they're not the most fancy in what they do, they still have unique elements which set them apart. So I think everyone will have different favorites in terms of which match they think was the best match. Some are performed really well dueling wise, but maybe are light on story, while others are very heavy on story and maybe are a little lighter on the mechanics. Um, and then your personal preference will come down to which ones you really favor. But yeah, it is very. It'll be very cool to see it all put together in one full package, and how that's received, which I think will be at least the last chance for a long while for the Gauntlet to potentially gather some steam now that people can watch the full Shadow game in one go. So yeah, I think again I don't want to prattle on too long. I've probably prattled on pretty enough. Hopefully I've been saving this because it has just been me today. Um, but yeah, I am still out there. I do check out what people are posting. I know that there is content out there that still needs to be unraveled. And hopefully, people can look at my content, and even if it has its flaws, you know, it never had the biggest views, it never earned me any money, and arguably there are much better editors out there than I who could have done it much more justice. Um, you know, hopefully there will be inspiration to be found, and one day we'll have a true successor that will show really what dark YouTubing can achieve. I think we will get there. It's just a matter of time. How much time? Hard to say. I mean, I started this back in 2018. It's now 2024. I still feel like we're lacking a true dark Yugi tubing success story. Even though we have Inscription, and I would say that new thing as well, the bullet roulette. I'll see if I can see it in the general chat. Again, it's not Yu-Gi-Oh again, but I think it captures the essence. Buckshot roulette, that's right. I think that and Inscription captured well the ethos of what we're aiming for. But I still think its time will come when we will have a really amazing dark Yugi tubing project that will capture both Yugi tubers and ARG creators' interests. And then maybe people will look back on the Gauntlet and think, well, was there more here? Was there a hidden gem in the rough? And hopefully this is not the end for interest in the Gauntlet now that we have wrapped. And again, I just want to thank everyone who's been along for the journey. I know I've mentioned most of you in the credits, but thank you again to the mods, Team Casual, Silence, to all the people IRL who have helped support me, all the artists who have helped create art for the series. At the moment, pardon me, I'm looking actually to potentially commission a Relinquished Soul avatar in line with the casual Kiwi style, so we'll see how that goes. And I would be interested to see what people think about AI being involved in future projects. I think there's a balance that can be struck where it can still be used in a respectful way that doesn't undercut artists, and can help creators who don't have a lot of resources but still want to be able to create projects and present them well, which is not easy at times. I mean, even in my own case, you know, there were times where just trying to get a really good avatar commissioned was both expensive and time consuming, and I had to be willing to take that hit to be able to progress forward. So it can be tough, but I am very happy with the end results. I think the avatars are definitely one of the best parts of the Gauntlet, and I have kept AI out of the Gauntlet. So yes, again, do let me know, do comment on things. I will be out there again. How active I'll be able to be with my legal lawyer job, hard to say, but I am out there. Just every little bit of feedback or interest means the world, because I have put many years of my time into this project. And you know, I'm just so thankful for everyone who has engaged with it over time. It's one of the things that has really kept me going. It's interesting that, I don't know, I found that with every episode of the Gauntlet, it got a little bit harder to make the next episode. And by the time I got to the final match, you know, where to save, you know, dragging things out unnecessarily, I was putting the matches together into single episodes. I was very drained. I hadn't been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! You know, Silent and I had broken up. I had work commitments. But I had promised that I would finish the Gauntlet, and so I carried on in any time that I found to get that together, even though it became quite tough to work on by the end. And so yeah, it was almost like with every deck that I, you know, stabbed with soy sauce, it took a little bit of my life essence, until I was very much a shade working on match 9. But we got there. You know, the Gauntlet is complete. And so yeah, just thank you everyone. And again, always love to hear what people think and have to say, and hopefully I will be returning with new interesting content soon. So thank you all for listening to this casual cast. Hopefully I've answered a lot of your questions. And do, if this is a YouTube video, leave any further questions you have. I will endeavor to answer them. So I think that's it for now. Thank you so much. Ngā mihi. Good night.